sempre. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Can you guys all hear me? Okay. Before I get started, I just want to say that I am sick today. If you can tell from my voice, I have tonsillitis, which is something I have every single month, but it's really hard for me to talk and it really hurts. I'm gonna try my best to cover everything we can today. And today we're gonna be talking about the Industrial Revolution. In my opinion, it's boring, but it's very important because everything we have today is based on Industrial Revolution. Before I get started, really, I have to fix the screen record real quick. So if you can give me a little bit of patience, that I would really appreciate it. Um, Before we get started, because we're still trying to fix that record thingy, I just want to ask how's everybody doing today? If you're doing well, you can send do an emoji. I think you can do that um with that like thingy like I'm doing right now. Oh, you can't really. You can only raise up your hand. Okay, anyhow, if you're doing fine, just yell at something. Today's about Industrial Revolution, so it's something that I feel, as I said, a little bit boring, but really important. Once again, if you have any question during our class, please just shout it out. We're going to be discussing capitalism, socialism, and communism today. So we're going to talk about them as economic models instead of political ones. If you have questions on those philosophy, you can also talk. You can also like just raise up your hand. We can have some discussions, and yeah. We're just gonna give it a little bit of time just because we're trying to fix that record thingy. Yeah. Okay. We're gonna start class right now. And can you all see my screen? I know that people on WeChat can probably see it, but can people on Tencent see my screen right now? If you can you just talk in chat or raise up, well, just like send something in chat. Can you guys hear me? I can't see anybody's like reacting. Am I offline? Anyhow, okay guys, I just want to say again, I need your feedback because or else I don't know if anybody can hear me. That's the problem. So please just keep that in mind. If you guys can't hear me, if my internet is laggy, please tell me. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking about the industrialization. Industrialization in history has two like waves. So we have the first industrialization, which is the time we're going to be talking about today, and then we have the second industrialization, industrial revolution, which is more focused on like more recent technologies, including long distance communication and some like more globalization. But that's for next class, in which we're going to be talking about how the second wave of imperialism and the second of industrial revolution is interconnected. But before we get onto that, I want to be talking about the first wave, just because it's the foundation of everything, and I just think it's really important just for us to realize how important the foundation is, and why industrial revolution is so important throughout history. And also, we just have to know how it started, and we also have to know the impacts of industrialization on different countries, including the Europeans, the Asian countries. And we're also going to be comparing why some industrialization succeed and some didn't. So without further ado, let's get started. So for some recap, last time we talked about the four big, I guess, logic chain and big moments in history. These are like Erica moments for me when I first learned about them. These are like things, if you guys, can anybody recall what four things we talked about last time? We spent like 1 hour and something talk about only four events. Can anybody remind me? I'll start first. We talked about the Renaissance. Can anybody tell me what Renaissance mean? So last time we talked about Renaissance literally means a key word that really describe what Renaissance the period is and the discovery we had. Anybody can tell me? Okay, nobody. That's okay. So Renaissance is basically means it means the revival of something. So the Renaissance that we talked about was that when some merchants from Darul Islam, they started to reread books from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and they basically spread those knowledge back to Europe. And if you recall, before the Renaissance, there's like the Middle Age, the Dark Age in Europe, in which there's really just stagnation in knowledge. And so the Renaissance was a revival of everything, the knowledge, the paintings. We talked about the Northern Renaissance, in which we have more focusing on Christian themes and normal people and like common people, as well as the more fancier Italian Renaissance with the symbolic paintings, Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's Sistine Church paintings, as well as the Raphael's School of Athens. Can anybody remind me what's the next thing we talked about last time after Renaissance? Remember, because if you just listen like you're listening to stories, there's no difference between learning history and listening to bedtime stories, okay? But the second thing we talked about was Protestant Reformation. This happens after the Renaissance, when people had the liberation of minds. We talked about humanism and secularism in Renaissance, in which is the emphasis on human nature and human beauty, as well as the separation of politics and religion. Protestant Reformation was the first time that people started to question the church, the authority, the ultimate authority. So Protestant Reformation, we know that Martin Luther, he banged the 95 Theses on a church on Halloween. And this started a whole bunch of reforms that criticized how the church was doing a lot of corruption, including simony, buying of churches' office, and also the sale of indulgences, the idea that you have to pay in order to go to heaven because you did some sins in your past times. The Protestant Reformation was really important because not only we have more branches in the church, like Lutheranism, Calvinism, Anglicanism, Anabaptism, and we have the Puritans who eventually went out to the United States and forming the United States as colonists. We also have the continuation of the liberation, which goes on to our third part, which is the scientific revolution, in which people started to question, if God doesn't exist, what really makes this world revolve and like just work? So we have the scientific revolution, in which people started to question rationally. They question, is the Earth really the center of the universe, or is something else like the sun? And then we also have people proposing different scientific methods like deductive and inductive reasonings. So all these things contributed to our final step, which is the enlightenment of our mind. The Age of Enlightenment marked a lot of emergences of philosophy and philosophers, and they also set a foundation for our social society as well as politics. We have the foundation natural rights, the life, liberty, and property being proposed by John Locke. We also have further on, we have the social contracts, in which it says people are giving up some power to the government for the government to protect the natural rights. If the government doesn't do it, the people have the rights and to really just overthrow them if necessary by force. We also have Montesquieu, who proposed separation of government, in which he proposed that the government should be split into three parts: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And we see that the United States government, embraced the three branches of government even to this day. We also have the freedom of speech proposed by Voltaire. He famously said that I may not disagree with you, but I'll defend to my death for you, the rights for you to say it. Further on, we also have Thomas Paine, who wrote The Common Sense, which was a best-selling book in the US, in which he proposed for independence. Not only we just talked about the four processes, we also talked about two important revolutions in human history, including the American Revolution, the American War of Independence, as well as the Haitian Revolution, which, as we talked about last class, is arguably the only successful slave revolt. I also just want to question people from our Tensi meeting. Did anybody watch videos I sent about the Latin American Revolution and the French Revolution? Anybody? If you have, you just kind of like type yes in the chat box. If you haven't, that's okay. Okay, I don't see any answers. That's okay. I highly encourage you guys to not only focus on the commonly known histories, but also look at stuff that are not often being discussed. If you guys are willing to, I can make separate videos on them, and I'll post them into our group chat. If you guys are like interested in those two revolutions I just talked about. Without further ado, we're now in the year of 1760 to 1840. This is the time of great industrial revolution, and this is the time of huge changes into society, politics, economy, and technology. So our table of contents today, yes, we're going to be covering some stuff today. We're going to be talking about the causes of industrial revolution. Why did industrial revolution just suddenly happen? We are going to talk about why Britain started the industrial revolution, and mainly talk about the environmental impacts. If you remember, we talked about the spice tea chart in our first, what? I don't know. Sorry, guys. My mom's reminding me. That's okay. Okay. Anyhow, so Britain was the first country to industrialize, and we're going to be talking about specifically the environmental impact, just because we talked about the spice tea charts in our first lesson, in which we talked about how we can analyze stuff in different aspects, and one of them is interaction with environment, which is the I in the spice tea. We didn't really cover that, so I'm going to be talking about that today. Moreover, we're going to be talking about how the Industrial Revolution, which really boosted the European economy, led to the decline of the Middle Eastern and Asian share in global manufacturing. And I'm also going to be talking about the governmental impact on Industrial Revolution. I didn't include it here, but we're going to do some primary source analysis. So I need you guys to open up your mic. If you don't, we're going to skip that part. And it's a huge loss for you. I'm just going to be really, really frank. It's going to be a loss for you, because if you're taking AP tests, or if you want to really just think critically, you have to think. You have to independently think, and you have to independently analyze. And then we're going to be talking about, some people really like this. I personally, it's not my favorite part, but we're going to be talking about the capitalism, socialism, communism. We're going to analyze their pros and cons. And then we're going to be talking about some new inventions under the Industrial Revolution, its impact. And ultimately, we're going to be comparing Meiji Restoration and the 100-Day Reform, one in Japan, one in China, one succeeded, one did not. And lastly, we're going to be talking about the working conditions under the Industrial Revolution, and how it led to working unions, and how it led to governmental reforms for some of the working class, and also child labor at the time, which was a huge problem. So, okay, so first of all, we're going to be talking about the causes of the Industrial Revolution. The first cause is called the Agricultural Revolution, as well as the Population Revolution, but these two are very interconnected. These are basically causation relationship. Again, everyone, because I can't talk too much today, I hope that if you have any questions, you just pause me. I don't want to ask, hey, does anybody have any question? That's a waste of time, and that's a waste of my throat. So I really hope you guys can understand that part. Okay, so for the agricultural revolution, before we have the agricultural revolution, these farms on we have basically small farms, and these farms are basically the farmers grow for themselves. So after they grow something, they eat it, and that's all. They really don't really have any excess foods. But in the agricultural revolution, because we have new farming methods like seed drill, and I'm going to be talking about that in our next part. We have crop rotation, and we also have New World's introduction of new crops like potatoes. People have a excess, and really just they have more food to not only sustain their own lives, but also for more for some people else. So that means people can not only just like food at the time before the agricultural revolution was a huge problem for a lot of people because some people may literally starve to death. So because we have access of food, people not only just have to focus on farming, and they can actually move to urban areas to do some not only just agriculture stuff, but also manufacturing and also start some enterprises. So the agricultural revolution was really important because it offered new opportunity for more people to go to urban areas. These are cities to find for more jobs and more opportunity. Because people can sustain themselves with a lot of food, the population boosted a lot because, as I said, people won't starve to death, and they don't really have to like concern if they can't raise their child because they don't have enough food. So with more population, people started to move to the urban area, which led to urbanization, the idea of increasing people, a lot of influx of people going into the city. So this is the idea I just talked about, the population explosion into the city. We have the people that eat better. We have women giving birth to healthier babies. And also we have better medical care that slows the death rate. This one will come a bit later, especially after the discovery of antibiotics. But at the time, yes, ultimately, the government will issue better medical care for the whole population, known as Medicare. And then we also have all these people need jobs and they move to cities just because the cities had much more opportunity than rural areas, which led to the more demand of good. And if you see, this is in the whole process of capitalism, of incentivizing an economy. So this is the idea of the industrialization building upon the idea of capitalism. And you will see that there's a lot of debates, or we're going to be talking about them. But yes, the status quo that is that people had more better conditions, and so more people go to urban areas seeking for new opportunity, leading to urbanization. So we're going to be talking about Britain because, as I said, Britain is the first country to industrialize. And we just talked about the agricultural improvements, the agricultural revolution, as well as demographic changes leading to the urbanization. Not only that, we just talked about that. We also have, Britain also have a very stable political systems. Yes, they did have wars with France, known as the French and Indian War in America. They also had the American War of Independence, in which they lost. They did have a relatively more stable political systems compared to France, which was under which is literally just under a recovery after the French Revolution, and Napoleon was having his Napoleonic War at the time. So Britain was relatively stable in the European continent. We also have the abolition of feudalism, as well as the abolition of slavery, which are two very traditional ways of economy, as well as mercantilism. If you can recall from our class of the first wave of imperialism, the idea that the world is only a pie, and there's only a fixed amount of resources each country can use, and if one gets one resource, the other loses that one. And so Britain completely abandoned feudalism and slavery. So they sort of move into a new era of economy in which people started to do free trade. And this is also thanks to our Enlightenment philosopher Adam Smith. His idea of free trade and the invisible hand was adopted by the British government. And we also have the expansion of property rights, which encouraged a lot of investment and innovation. with less governmental control, especially less monarch control as well as parliamentary control, private investments, competitions emerged, and so that incentivized more competition, which is the idea we're going to be talking about throughout today's lesson. We also have the rise of the middle class, which is a huge, very important class, huge population, very important class in the industrial revolution. And we also have the decline of the aristocracy, which are the people who are rich and have like royal linkage or like lineage bloodline. So these decline of the aristocracy allowed for greater social mobility and the emergence of entrepreneurial spirits. Any questions so far? Yes, and we are using English today throughout the class just because I just don't have any strength to translate anymore. All right, we're gonna continue on with our environment, which is the part I wanted to emphasize. Britain has, does anybody know where Britain is located? Yeah, I know it's in Europe, but Britain is really special in its geographic location because first of all, it has an abundant amount of natural resources. For the first wave of imperialism, one thing is really important, it's coal. So coals are basically the engines for the first wave of industrial revolution. We need coals to every factory needs coal, and to keep us warm in winter we need coals, and Britain at the time had a lot of coals. That's a like a natural resource, a very good natural advantage over a lot of different countries at the time. We also have the access to waterways. As I said, Britain is an island country. It is in Europe, it is close to France, and between Europe and France, we have literally a waterway. So inside of Britain, you also know that there's a lot of rivers. So if you can recall, I talked about in our first lesson that water transportation is often more beneficial than like on the land transportation, just because the water itself, you can have a lot of more cargoes to be transported on water, and it's using less strength, using less resources. You just need to have a boat and flow with the water current, which is really convenient. So that is also one of the things that made Britain the lead in the Industrial Revolution. Not only Britain itself, the country itself has natural resources, we also have a lot of convenient resources from its colonies. Yes, the Britain, as we talked about, they have colonial resources from the Caribbeans. They have, yes, they don't have the American colonial raw materials anymore, but they do have South American resources as well, just not as much. But yes, because they're a big imperial country, it's literally the British Empire by its name at the time. They did have a lot of colonial raw material for them to do manufacturing, which really led the country to be prosperous enough economically to sustain its industrial revolution. And we also have some new technologies like the spinning jenny, the water frame. Do I have the pictures here? Yeah, this is the spinning jenny. It's where people don't have to use their hand. It's a machine to transform cotton into wearable clothes. We also have the water frame. And then we have the interchangeable parts, assembly line, specialization of labor. These three are together. These three are a system of labor. So I put a McDonald's hamburger here because it's a really good analogy to explain sort of what all the three parts is. Interchangeable parts are parts that can be reused, like a nail in a machine. These are interchangeable parts. Specialization of labor, as the name suggests, is that everybody has a specialized thing to do on the assembly line. So for example, if we have this burger, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that every single McDonald's like people working there, like worker, they specialize in one thing. Some people will fry the fries or fry the chicken. Some people will make the meatloaves. Some people will like add everything together and make a burger. And some people will package the burgers. And some will be like at the desk and ask what you want. So everything, this is the specialization of labor. It makes everything so productive. Everybody do their job. And when they combine together, their assembly line. This makes everything really fast, productive. And so that's the whole point of industrialization, make everything more productive as possible. But if you realize that there's a little problem here, it's when some firms want a lot of profits, especially at the time, right? Those bourgeoisie, which is a term that described the capitalists at the time. There's a lot of involvement in exploitation of workers, like specifically in the specialization of labor. Some child laborers these workers are needed to be work for long hours every single day, 14 hours. We're going to be talking about that later, which caused a lot of troubles, societal troubles at the time. So again, I just talked about what an example of the assembly line, specialization of labor, but this is a more, I guess, more textbook version. I'm just going to read it off. The assembly lines is a method used in the factories to produce goods. So as I said, instead of one person completing all the tasks, we have the process being broken into smaller parts. So everybody has an assigned skill of task. So this is basically the division of labor. This is the thing I'm talking about in this picture. And then we also have, as I said, mercantilism versus capitalism. Mercantilism, if you can't remember, just as I just talked about, is the pie theory, which is the idea that the zero-sum game, one wins, one loses. But let's just think about it. Why did Britain at the time suddenly just abandon mercantilism? Because that just doesn't make any sense, right? So one thing is that because mercantilism has a lot of trade restrictions, the restricted trade led to high inflation and high taxes, which is not beneficial for anyone in the country at the time. So the British Empire did abandon mercantilism at the time. And it's also a misguided economic strategy, which can lead countries to focus on exports. Because if you recall, mercantilism really emphasizes that a country should maximize its exports and to minimize its imports to really just make the country more advantageous over the others and more rich in a sense. But this is misguided because it doesn't emphasize on domestic productivity, which can be a huge problem. And then we also have anti-innovation because mercantilism is also controlled a lot by the government. So there's less firm competition and domestic competition, which really isn't good for innovation. And then lastly, we also have humanitarian abuses, specifically slavery, in which we talked about in our second class, and we analyzed a primary source on Amazing Grace, in which we talked about how slavery is bad, not only humanitarianly, but also economically. Okay, this is the pie thing I just talked about. Like, mercantilism thinks that the world is a whole pie. If one takes away one slice, the other doesn't have it. Is that true? No, it doesn't, because the world, how the modern day economy typically work is that people not only cooperate together, but also the competitions really incentivize more innovations. And so it's sort of like that invisible hand theory when the economy can adjust itself over time. We do have government regulation, but it really differs country by countries. And we're going to be talking about why that happens. And it's really because I think the root is really from the Industrial Revolution. And then we're going to be talking about a little shift, and I'm just going to put it here. So we talked about how problematic mercantilism was. And then we're going to be talking about a little shift, how it shifted all of a sudden to capitalism. The first thing is, if you recall, and yes, I didn't mention it last time, which was my fault, but yes, during the Age of Enlightenment, not only we have the other philosophy thinkers, we also have economic thinkers like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. These two people promoted the free trade ideology, which is the idea of the invisible hand, the capitalism. and they emphasize on not only just the absolute advantage. Anybody here has learned economic at school before? So absolute advantage is when someone can produce like numerally more stuff than the other, but comparative advantage is how less opportunity costs we are going to sacrifice in making something. Opportunity cost is the cost that you are, like time is an opportunity cost, and also your strength is an opportunity cost. So these two economists, they emphasizes on comparative advantage rather than absolute advantage. And then we also have industrialization and economic modernization. Because more entrepreneurs, because as we talked about, more people are going to the cities seeking for more opportunities. These people wanted to gain more economic freedom. And so that is the idea of economic modernization, not only the economies being controlled under the government, but more people are willing to do their own economy, do their own business, which incentivizes competition. We also have geopolitical shifts. So this is the idea of shifts to European, and also, as I talked about, most European nations who are doing successful industrialization had their colonies as providers of raw materials for manufacturing. So that is also one thing. And then there's also a pressure for economic reform, which is the idea of the emerging middle classes. They wanted more access to a wider range of goods, better prices, as well as more opportunities. So all of the societal, ideological, economical, political, environmental factor sort of all motivated the shift to capitalism, to a less controlled economy by the government. And then, so I'm gonna just, as I said, I'm gonna be showing the slide all to you guys because, as I said, I just don't really want to talk too much. But we're gonna be talking about not only the British today, we're gonna be talking about how the other countries as well did their industrialization. So first we have France and Germany. They had delayed industrialization, as I said, mainly because France was under a turmoil after the 1789 French Revolution, as well as the Napoleonic Wars. And Germany at the time hasn't been a country yet. So Germany will emerge in our next class. Germany at the time is under the Holy Roman Empire. So Germany at the time wasn't a country yet. We also have the United States. They first of all, they emphasize on a human capital, and because they're too far away from the Europeans, they sort of wait until the Europeans' innovations go to the United States. So after the railroad was constructed in Britain, they sort of got that invention and the invention invented in their own place. So United States, because they're too far away from the European continent, they are sort of like delayed as well. We also have Russia. Russia at the time was very special. Russia still adopted feudalism, and they have serfs. So serfs, if you recall, in our first class, is under feudalism. It's sort of like a slavery, but they work for their like owner for a little price. So they still have that really traditional way of economy. They hadn't modernized until the Tsar sort of just died off from the Russian Revolution. But before that, they did build the Trans-Siberian Railroad, but Russia was really late in the industrialization because of its political and also its economic models. So I just talked about a little bit here, as you can see, of Russia's reason why they started late. But I do believe it's mainly because of the political and social structure. I put Japan here. Japan is very special. Japan and Germany are two countries that started industrialization late, but they really productively industrialized faster than most other countries. We're going to be talking about Germany in our next class because Germany hasn't, as I said, hasn't become a country yet at the time, but Japan has. So Japan did something called the Meiji Restoration, in which we're going to be looking at today, just because I think it's so fascinating. They industrialized in such a short amount of time. And Japan is also the first country that has successfully modernized and industrialized in Asia. And it is the only one for a very long time, interestingly. And because of the manufacturing, all the manufacturing was being done in Europe, the shipbuilding in India and the textile production in India and Egypt was being suffered a lot because industrialization was so productive, the prices was so low. Shipbuilding and as well as textile production, these sort of like manufacturing in colonial regions suddenly become not as profitable as before because they're still relying on human capitals instead of machineries. So the sort of like you have a better option in Europe. Most people just don't turn to other regions, especially the colonial regions, which led to the decline of overall economy in India and Egypt. And because I think ultimately next class we're going to be talking about the second wave of imperialism. The decline of those colonial regions make them more vulnerable for their mother country sort of to take over its control completely, especially in those two regions, because those two regions, India was controlled totally by the British East India Company in our next class. Same for Egypt. They're going to be controlled as well by the British, in which they're building a lot of construction there, but really just exploiting their resources. So I'm just gonna say that industrialization, while it's beneficial to a certain group, a lot of people are being harmed, not only domestically in Europe, in which we're going to be focusing on a lot today, but also overseas. So you see that sort of opportunity cost there as well. And then now I'm going to be talking about Meiji Restoration. Before I get started with that, I just want to ask if anybody have any questions so far. For everything we just talked about. Okay, so we're going to be talking about Meiji Restoration and the 100-Day Reforms, but before we talk about the Chinese one, we're going to be talking about the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji Restoration was being prompted by this guy. He's the Meiji Emperor in Japan. So how this all happened? So this is a painting from Japan. This is the painting that is really famous because they depicted the American ship, the Perry ship, Matthew Perry's ship, as like an evil thing. But in reality, the ship doesn't look like that. It looks like this. So how the Meiji Restoration happened was that before the Meiji Restoration, Japan had its economic policy called 闭关锁国. It literally means that they're not going to open up their gates. They're practicing isolationism. And because of that, some European powers, especially the US, they wanted to do trades with Japan. Japanese, of course, they didn't want it because they wanted to practice their isolationism. So the US commander, Commodore Matthew Perry, he drove this big ship, black ship into Japan and sort of commanded the Japan to end their isolationism economic policy and instead trade with the US. So here is a little I think very interesting depiction of the two different cultures' interpretation of industrialization at the time. One very traditional, one the complete opposite. So before the Meiji Restoration is literally the idea of the Meiji Emperor at the time started a lot of modernization or westernization, become more Western. From this picture, we have traditional Japanese wearing hefu, which is the Japanese clothing, and then they sort of evolved very fastly, very instantly into a more, I guess, more Western style. It's not entirely Western style, but you can see their Western style, like sort of these very hipsy, not hipsy, but like hippie, not hippie, I can't say that, but yes, they're having more westernized clothings. This is from a women's side. And they also have their own factories, which is the idea of industrialization domestically, because you can see this is also an assembly line. I think they're doing from their machinery. You can see that they're doing something related to clothing, cotton or textile industry. So the Meiji Restoration was a huge success compared to the 100-Day Reform in China. Does anybody know 戊戌变法 here? Am I missing the chat? Oh yeah, I am. That's really weird. Does anybody know Someone says my internet's really laggy. Can you all hear me? Anyhow, that's okay. Anybody know the 100-day reform in China, the 戊戌变法? All right. So the 100-day reform was happening after, um, well, it happens after, if you guys know the Boxer Rebellion, which was 义和拳. So the 100-day reform was an attempt from China to reform as the Westerners, but it failed really miserably. And I have concluded some reasons I think was the reason that they failed. And this is the same thing I said in my 7th grade in my school Eastern Civilization class, which I talked about it for like 20 minutes, but I'm just going to shorten it into like 1 minute. So the first thing is political leadership and cohesion. Meiji Restoration was being led by the emperor, but if you guys don't remember, I'll just like sort of recall it for you. But Japan at the time, the emperor was a figurehead. So he didn't really have any power. But because I think he was aided by the Western powers, he sort of got more power and politically. So he had his own armies, so that he could stop the daimyos and the samurai rebellion. On the other hand, the 100-day reform was totally different. Our political leadership at the time was under Dowager Cixi. So that person, Dowager Cixi didn't want reform at all, because she knows that if the country reforms, it's going to do no good for her. She's going to lose her power by a lot, if not every single part of her power. So she didn't want the reform. But at the time, she was also being pushed by the Westerners. So the Westerners also forced her to reform as well. But because of her traditional values and also the eager for power, which is, as I said, it's very common, but yes, that political leadership and cohesion didn't lead. It was a huge factor that the 100-day reform didn't succeed. We also have resistance. So if you guys, if you're interested in Meiji Restoration, maybe check out a movie called The Last Samurai. This is a movie that talks about exactly the Meiji Restoration resistance. So the main cast is his name's called Tom Cruise, if you're interested. But resistance from the Meiji Restoration is mainly the samurai rebellion. So these samurais, they didn't want reforms at all. So they did have the resistance. However, that was being crushed because the samurais only had bows and swords, so they can't combat with the machine guns and all the technologies that the modern Emperor Meiji's army. So that resistance was being crushed. The 100-day reform, however, it's not the government itself is not cohesive at all. So most people at the time didn't want reforms. They wanted traditional way, because China has been like Chinese dynastic cycle has been there for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, if not. So that sort of traditional value also stopped the succeed of the 100-day reform. We also have the breadth and the depth of the reform. The Meiji Restoration not only just restore the clothings and the factories, they also reforms education. Which I think education is so important, and that's one of the reasons I started OpenEdu. Meiji Restoration, they wanted to so they not only just educate, they not only just buy the equipment needed, like the big ships and the big cannons and the big machineries for factories, they also teach people how to use it. On the other hand, the 100-day reform, the Qing government at the time, they bought a lot of big technologies, probably the best technology at the time. They have the big warships, but nobody knew how to use it. So because of the lack of education at the time, especially people are taking civil service exam, was based on Confucianism values instead of more modern just knowledge. It wasn't really useful with those big machineries. People didn't even know how to use it. So the breadth and the depth of the reform wasn't being achieved by the 100-day reform. But once again, that's why the reason is called the 100-day reform, because it only lasted for 100 days and then it failed. Also, bad timing. Meiji Restoration, yes, Meiji Restoration was being forced at the time by Commodore Matthew Perry, but the Hundred Day Reform was happening under the Opium War, and and also the Boxer Rebellion. So you have internally conflict out and externally conflict. So the country is sort of like they don't know what to do at the time. The government is so splitted. They're not concentrated in reforming. They're more concentrated in how to really just survive under turmoil. So that is also one thing. I think one of the most important factors that why the 100-day reform failed. So from the Meiji Restoration versus the 100-day reform, I think that personally at the time I learned how important it is to find the roots of everything and solve that roots instead of just finding the surface of the problems. And I think learning history is so important just because of that, because you not only just learn about stories, you have to think about why everything happens. If you don't understand how these happens, I think you don't really learn history. You just memorize stories. And so I think this is a good lesson for everybody to learn. Meiji Restoration and the 100-day reform, one succeeded making Japan into one of the not one of the biggest and the most powerful country in Asia economically and technologically, and at the time, while the 100-day reform totally crushed the Chinese government at the time, the Qing dynasty at the time, making the whole country known as the sick man of Asia. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm gonna keep continuing. Oh yeah, there's also the openness of Western technology and institutions, but as I said, it's also related to political leadership. 道之自己 she didn't want that. So huge impact on that factor. And then I want to be talking about the two countries known as the sick man. Does anybody recall anything about the Ottoman Empire we talked about in our second class? Anything like how they conquered Constantinople, or how they sort of pushed the European nations to find another trade route just because they blockaded. They had the blockade for Asian goods flowing to the European markets. Anybody can recall anything like that? Well, we just did. So the Ottoman Empire at the time was already very corrupted. It failed a lot. So the Ottoman Empire at the time was known as the sick man of Europe, while China at the time under the Opium War, and also it was being split into the spheres of influences, especially if you know not only the colonies in Hong Kong and Macau, but also China was also being divided, like city-wise, is also being divided. Like, if you know Shanghai Waitan, it's literally being under the sphere of influence at the time of the Westerners. So the Ottoman Empire did not successfully industrialize because of its government's kind of corruption, and also the Young Turks who had this ethnic nationalism for rebellion. So the whole country was also very unstable at the time. Government was not effective, and you have internal crisis. So that's the reason that the Ottoman Empire did not industrialize very well. Government didn't want to do it, and they also have to deal with internal problems. So it's very clear why the two at the time they were sick men, but before that they were superpowers, sort of failed in the process of industrialization. So here's a picture of at the time how China looked like. It was huge, but it became what is now today, not only during this time, but also more importantly in next class, in which we know how many countries split China up into the place we see today. Here's a little propaganda. Can you guys remember? Yeah, it's okay. We're just gonna be talking about it. So this is a very famous propaganda at the time. It literally depicts how the European nations, this is Queen Victoria. This really comes a bit later. This is Japan. And you see this dehumanization of Chinese, their nails being grow very long. They have the queue. They're being depicted as someone who's not humanly like. So they're dividing this huge pie of China up. Which symbolizes how weak China was at the time and how thirsty those European nations were, and how they're doing it, they're harming the economic benefit. basically the humanitarian and economically for all those colonies, not only China. The effects of industrialization are not only just the big machinery and the big boost of production of goods and manufacturing, but also some really important social aspects. We have the emergence of the consumerism, which is the idea that the consumer should be like consumer is the god, that the interest of consumer should be the most important factor in a business transaction. So this is the bicycle at the time. A lot of people use the bicycle for work or to go around the city. This bicycle is very unsafe, so it ultimately turned into the bicycle we see today. And not only we have the consumerism, we also have the industrialization effects on the working class. If you see this picture right over here, I think this is a pretty famous picture because it shows the social structure at the time under the Industrial Revolution. So we have at the bottom, we have the working class, and then we have the middle class, and then we have the bourgeoisie, the big capitalist. So the working class is at the lowest of the pyramids, as you can see right over here. They're under the society. They're sort of like the if you kind of recall from the Indian caste system, they're the untouchables. So these are the people who had a lot of burdens, and they are really poor. They're working very poor conditions, living very poor conditions, while getting the most exploited. The working conditions in the factories were so horrible that the factories were poorly ventilized. The air was very stale. It's very dirty, and it's also poor lit. There's literally no lights, and the machines were very dangerous. And if you can recall, I just talked about how the men were being required to work at least 14 hours a day. That's like, I think that's more than like we study today in a Chinese public high school, which is already very brutal. But yes, they were required to work every single day, 14 hours. Women had to go to factories as well, and even children had to go to factory. This is a picture of child labor. Shoot. Okay, here, and injuries often occurred. We're going to be looking at how injuries occurred in a primary source. And very brutally, if you hurt, you lose your job, and there's no compensation or medical insurance. So these managers, the bourgeoisies, the overseers are really abusive to all the workers, but especially to the children. This is a very, very famous picture being shot by a British newspaper at the time, depicting how dirty the children look in a coal miner. And this was also being published on the newspaper, facilitating for social change and attentions towards child labor. So this is the factory condition in for women in the textile industry. As you can see, they're very crowded. And when it's summer, you can imagine how hot it is. And in winter, as you can see, their clothing is just very, very thin. It's ultimately, I think, is very brutal working conditions. This is how the workers live. So as you can see, this is literally trash along the street. So because of those really bad hygienes, a lot of people die because they drink dirty water or eat dirty food, and mainly caused by cholera. And then you also have those small, very, very small spaces, like living spaces called tenements. And these tenements are usually very crowded, very small, and sometimes they don't even have windows. So over time, people with working unions sort of prompted for changes, and it ultimately become that every single tenement should have a window and at least should be, I can't like remember exactly how many inches apart, but they did have a required distance between each tenement to ensure a basic like condition for living. And so now I want to be talking about a primary source analysis. So if you because if I open my VPN, like, can you guys all hear me well? Anybody? Let me just type. Can you all hear me well? Oh, my internet sucks right now. Oh Christ, no way. No way. No way. Hold on. You guys, I apologize. All right. Uh, are you willing to? I need someone to read with me for this very interesting primary source reading. I think it's really, really fun for someone to read with me. Anybody? Nobody? Hey, sorry guys. Sorry people on WeChat. Let me just call in. Anyone wants to read with me? Anyone? Just one person? I'll just call on someone random, okay? Just because let's keep this moving. I'll call on Nicole. Nicole, are you willing to read with me? You just have to answer the question 22, a blanket manufacturer. Are you willing to do that?
Yeah, okay.
Awesome, awesome. So I'm going to read the things here, okay? Just to give a little bit of context. In 1832, Michael Sattler secured a parliamentary investigation of the conditions in the textile factories, and he sat as chairman on the committee. The evidence printed here is taken from the large body published in the committee's report and is representative rather than exceptional. It will be observed that the questions are frequently leading. This reflects Sattler's knowledge of the sort of information that the committee were to hear and its purpose of bringing it out. This report stands out as one of the three great reports on the life in the industrial class, the two others being that of the Ashley Commission on the Mines and a report on sanitary problems. The immediate effect of the investigation and the report was the passage of the Act of 1833, limiting hours of employment for women and children in textile work. So I'm going to be Mr. Matthew Captree, and you're going to be whoever's answering. So the 22. Is that okay with you, Nicole?
Okay,
Oh,
yeah.
shoot. Okay, awesome. I'm going to be, okay, what age are you?
22.
What is your occupation?
A blanket manufacturer.
Have you ever been employed in a factory?
Yes.
At what age did you first go to work in one?
8.
How long did you continue in that occupation?
4 years.
Will you state the hours of labor at the period when you first went to a factory in ordinary times?
From 6 in the morning to 8 at night.
14 hours?
Yes.
With what intervals of refreshments and rest?
And an hour at noon.
When trade was brisk, what were your hours?
From 5 in the morning to 9 in the evening.
16 hours?
Yes.
With what intervals at dinner?
An hour.
How far did you live from the mill?
About 2 miles.
Was there any time allowed for you to get your breakfast in the mill?
No.
Did you take it before you left your house?
Generally.
During those long hours of labor, could you be punctual? How did you awake?
I seldom did wake up spontaneously. I was most generally awoke or lifted out of bed, sometimes asleep by my parents.
Were you always in time?
No.
What was the consequences if you had been too late?
I was most commonly beaten.
Severely?
Very severely, I thought.
In those meals and chastisements towards the latter part of the day going on perpetually?
Perpetually.
So that you can hardly be in the mill without hearing constant crying.
Never an hour, I believe.
Do you think that if the overlooker were naturally a humane person, it would still be found necessary for him to beat the children, or in order to keep up their attention and vigilance at the termination of those or extraordinary days of labor?
Yes, the machine turns off a regular quantity of cartings, and of course they must keep as regularly to their work the whole of the day. They must keep with the machine, and therefore, however humane the slubber may be, as he must keep up with the machine or be found fault with. He spurs the children to keep up also by various means, but that which he commonly resorts to is to strap them when they become drowsy.
At the time when you were beaten for not keeping up with your work, were you anxious to have done it if you possibly could?
Yes, the dread of being beaten if we could not keep up with the work was a sufficient impulse to keep us to if we could do it.
When you got home at night after this labor, that's okay. Did you feel much fatigued?
Very much so.
Had you had any time to be with your parents or to receive instruction from them?
No.
What did you do?
All that we did when we got home was to get the little bit of supper that was provided for us and go to bed immediately. If the supper had not been ready directly, we should have gone to sleep while it was prepared.
Did you not, as a child, feel it a very grievous hardship to be roused so soon in the morning?
I did.
Were the rest of the children similarly circumstanced?
Yes, all of them, but they were not all of them so far from their work as I was.
Hmm. And if you had been too late, you were under the apprehension of being cruelly beaten?
I generally was beaten when I happened to be too late, and when I got up in the morning, the apprehension of that was also great. That I used to run and cry all the way as I went to the mill.
Awesome, Nicole. That was so awesome. So, if you can still open up your mic, I just want to ask, how did you feel after you read this big chunk of paragraph and dialogue?
Uh, I found like the workers are very, uh, really tired every day, and then have no time to uh, rest, and then they're like really hardworking and tired.
Exactly. So, not only we see that they're working long hour for a lot of workload, they're also being beaten by their overlooker, by their managers. So,
Yeah.
Nicole, what do you think that the workers were going to respond to the kind of condition they're under?
Um, Maybe they'll like re- rebel. I don't know.
Okay, that's a great one. Anything else you can think about?
Uh, Not really.
Okay, so when you talk about rebel, what do you think they're gonna do? Like, are they going to rebel like individually, or what they're gonna do? What thing are they going to plead for changes?
I think they're gonna unite and
Mm-hmm.
rebel. Uh, for maybe less work hours or less proud uh workers.
Exactly. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was awesome because that's the exact thing we're going to be discussing. So Nicole talks about rebellion among the workers, which is exactly what the workers did. They formed something called the labor union, the working unions. These are organizations of the workers that advocated for their rights. So they bargain with their employers or their overlooker or their managers, whatever, and they put resulting agreements and contracts. Some labor unions, they sometimes just stop working as a whole, and they sort of just boycott their work as a way to show disagreement and unsatisfaction for their working condition. What the labor union was really important was that this is the time when people were not pleading for political pursuits, but this is the time where people started to come together as workers, and they only demand for a humane treatment as well as humane wages and those basic things that workers should have. So the labor unions, they not only improved workers' lives by winning minimum wages laws, limiting number of hours being worked, overtime pay, everything. But they also push for governmental change. They also pushed for the emergence of new philosophers and philosophy, which is exactly what we're going to be looking at just in a few minutes. The labor union also fought for voting rights. So if you can recall, voting rights not only in the US was like elite thing. So it's not only that it's not only in the US where people who can vote at the time were people who are rich, who owned a certain amount of property, but this also happened in Europe. So the labor union fought for working men's rights to vote in 1918. So this allows not only the rich people to vote, but also for the people who didn't have the money and the property to vote. However, the women did not gain suffrage to vote until 1928. This is a little bit different than the US because in the US, the women started to vote in 1919. Okay, and then we also have child labor. A law in 1843 declared that children under the age of 10 was being banned from working in the coal mines. In 1881, education became mandatory for British children between the ages of 5 and 10. So this is all, reforms pushed by not only the labor unions, but also the magazines and the newspaper that reported those pictures and dialogues and interviews and investigations, like the one I just read with Nicole. And so this focus on education as opposed to work just for monetary gain permanently redefine the role in children in urban society. So imagine we still have to work long hour and not being able to have proper education. We have to thank to the workers at the time that pushed for illegally abandoned child labor. And then I think we're going to be talking about until our last part of the lecture today, which is about the philosophy that emerged. So we're going to be talking about Karl Marx and Eugene Engels, who are two people that started the foundation of communism. So Karl Marx, he wrote this book called The Communist Manifesto, and I want to highlight the communism we're talking about here is economic stuff. So we're not talking about the political communism we see today, because Karl Marx, at the time, he proposed communism as an economic principle as opposed to capitalism. According to Marx, capitalism was an advance on feudalism, and it sort of like creates the gap between a different social class. And because it produced tremendous amount of wealth, it also produced needless poverty and misery, especially to the proletariat. So this is the Communist Manifesto. You can see Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. I mistakenly said Eugene. I apologize. But Karl Marx, he specifically divided the group into two groups to divide the population. One is called proletariat, and the other one is bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie are the managers. These are the capitalists who exploit the proletariats, their interests as well as wealth. And those are the people who created the needless poverty and misery in Karl Marx's opinion. And I want to introduce communism and capitalism as two distinct economic principles, just because last time my class was being censored on Bilibili, so I don't want to get into politics anymore. So communism is a system in which goods are being owned in common and are available to all as needed. So this is the idea that everyone has everything. There's no one who should be miserable. There's nobody is over the other, and everybody's equal. Everybody can get equal amount of stuff. However, in capitalism, it's a totally different and opposite system. And it says this system is based on private ownership and on investment of money and business in order to make a profit. So in capitalism, it emphasizes on more individualism, and the idea that individuals should compete for themselves, and overall, because everybody wants the best for themselves, there is going to create competition, which is exactly what we see from industrialization, industrial revolution as a whole, and modern day, most democratic and big countries utilize capitalism because they think that it's the fastest way to gain profits, as it's also the fastest way to gain innovations, because everyone wants to win over the other, so they have to find a better way and more productive way in producing stuff. And I want to talk about the pros and cons about communism. I do want to discuss, but however, I think, yeah, I'm just going to talk about, we're going to be talking about the cons. I want some answers for the cons. For communism, we introduced that the idea of equality, and there's no like differences in class. So in communism, communists emphasize on three things. One is economic equality, and the second one is universal to basic needs, and the last one is no employment in principle. So economic equality is basically the idea that because communism aims to eliminate large gaps between the rich and the poor by redistributing resources so that everyone has the basic needs met. So economic equality being achieved because this idea can reduce poverty and social tensions caused by inequalities. Second one is about universal to basic needs, because in theory, communism provides provides housing, healthcare, education, employment, every basic needs to all citizens, regardless of whoever or how many wealth they have. So this sort of just remove the financial barriers. And then we also have no employment in principle, because since the state plans the economy, the state in the sense the government plans the economy, everyone is assigned work, has assigned work according to their abilities. So there's like no involuntary unemployment. So everybody sort of just have a job they have to do. Anybody think of the cons? Like I personally, when I was in 8th grade and I started to look at communism, I think it's great philosophy, great theory. Anybody can think about a con side of communism as an economic theory? Oh, shoot. Let me see if I can see the chat box. Anybody? Okay, that's okay. So I think communism's main problem is the idea of plan. So you see everything, equality, basic needs, no employment. These are all being planned by the central government or by the authority, or someone who controls the resources. And because everything is planned, so the idea of economic as a subject is discussing how we can allocate resources most effectively. So in a planned economy, under communism, under the theory of communism, there are some problems. So first of all, we have the lack of economic incentive, because the governments allocate everything to you. You really have to like win anything for yourself. You just have to do the employment, do the things that the government asks you to do. So everybody sort of just do their job, and there's rarely economic incentives for competitions. There's no competition because the government eliminate it completely. And you would say, why do we have to have competition? Well, competition is brutal itself, but it does drives for technological improvements, in which we see in industrial revolution. If we don't have those competition, there's no way we have the assembly line or the specialization of labor. And then we also have misallocation of the resources. This is not like absolute. It's not like a communist country always misallocates resources, but it's very common because in a planned economy, it's really easy for the authority or the person who controls the resources to misallocate, because they can't investigate on everyone's needs. So that's a problem. Misallocation of resources sometimes, actually in most cases, will result in a lot of big troubles like starvation, in which we see in many communist-based countries, especially in the Soviet Union or in modern day North Korea. And so right now I want to talk about the capitalism pros and cons. So as I said, no philosophy has like all pros or all cons. There's so if you know a little bit about the Cold War, you will know that the US sort of propagates that communism is a really bad thing. As we talked about communism as a theory, it has its pros, right? But it also has its cons, like capitalism, like every isms. So in capitalism, the pros of capitalism, of course, is economic efficiency, because competition encourages cost cutting and productivity. And then we also have innovation and progresses being motivated by profits and competitions. We also have consumer choices because we have all the variety of things to choose. Consumer can choose whether they want to buy something, and this also sort of just leads to the idea of competition. Every single firm wants to produce the things that everybody wants to buy. So overall, this market thing will drive the price down or up according to people's demands. We also have flexibility, which is the idea is that markets can adapt really quickly to changing demands. So it's often in a depression, or not a depression, but in an economic recession in which the economy isn't doing so well. In a capitalist economy, the economy will adjust itself over time because of its supply and demand. And then we also have the wealth creation. Generally, it's because historically, like people, like wealth is being created by competition and also profit driven. So the idea of capitalism is also to generate as much wealth as possible as an incentive for people to innovate and to produce more stuff for the consumer to choose. So it's like a supply and demand relationship. But also on the other hand, we have also main cons. So from the Industrial Revolution, we can see that there's income inequality, there's market failures, there's exploitation risk, there's short-term focus, and a lot of stuff. We see that the wealth often concentrates the wealth among the few. Like you see in America today, the wealth is usually concentrated in that few big firms. Like the news company, the United News controls a bunch of news company. And then we have market failures because some big companies, sometimes oh, sorry guys, that's my phone because it doesn't really have any battery. I apologize. But some market failures were being like created because of monopolies as well as pollutions. Big firms can create monopolies, which is a more complex situation in economy. And there's also exploitation risks, as we have seen from the Industrial Revolution, in which workers can be undervalued. So these people, as Nicole and I just talked about from the dialogue, from the investigation at the time, was a very good example of exploitation under the capitalism formula. And then we also have short-term focus, which is the idea that the business may prioritize quick profits over long-term benefits. This can be a problem for some consumers, especially when they're choosing products over the others. And then we also have unequal access to essentials because if under a whole capitalist society, no firms would like to do some like healthcare and education and housing, which are less profitable than other businesses. And these, especially like healthcare and collecting taxes, if government doesn't do any interventions, these will ultimately create problems in which people may not be accessible to those basic needs. Any questions so far? Okay, so here's a spectrum I asked ChatGPT to generate for me. I will send this picture in our chat because I think it's pretty good demonstration, like what capitalism, social democracy, because we just talked about capitalism and communism, which are the two extreme ends on the spectrum. But if you want to know more about social democracy and socialism, you definitely can look into this chart. It's basically less extreme version of capitalism and less extreme version of communism. As we know, communism countries are Soviet Union and North Korea. But nowadays, only North Korea. You can say that some other countries like Cuba are communism, but they don't operate entirely like communism, in which the state plans the economy totally. So if you're interested in this chart, I would definitely highly recommend you to look at it. It only costs like 1 minute or so, really. And then lastly, I do have a document in which explains communism, socialism, and capitalism more in detail. Especially if you want to look into socialism, you can definitely check that out. I can send it in our group chat as well. And because I can't talk at all, I'm also going to send this Industrial Revolution game into our group chat. And before this class ends, I just want to ask if anybody has any question in regards to anything we just talked about today, on WeChat or on our Tencent meeting. Anybody have any questions? Okay. I'm glad you're all here today. I want to say a big thank you. Next class, we're going to be talking about the second wave of imperialism. There might be an adjustment of the timing just because I'm going to be starting school on the 18th. So I'm not entirely sure if I can do 17th, especially there's also a soccer game in my city. So we'll see. I'll try to do Sunday as I personally want to do Sunday because Saturday is my dad's birthday and I do want to celebrate it with him. So yeah, thank you all. Thanks so much for everyone on WeChat, on Tencent meeting for coming. I'm really glad you guys are here. Any questions before we leave? Okay, if there's no more question, I just hope that you guys don't catch a virus like I do. Rest well before I know school is starting for some basics kids. So for basics kids, I hope you all the best. Yeah, especially for those who are not seniors yet. Have fun. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll see you guys in our next class, hopefully next Sunday. And yeah, thank you so much for coming and all the supports. I'm gonna end this meeting. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye, Nicole. Thank you so much.